What's up, you guys? It's your boy Ben Mahari here, representing Mahari Nation Sports Podcast. Much love to the entire LDBC and the entire basketball community. Um, I will resume my show of basketball conversations tomorrow night at an earlier time at 8 p.m. Central Time. We're going to discuss all the other stuff that's been going on around the league, in particular about the Brooklyn Nets that have been struggling. Not really trying to find themselves, at the start of the season, but we'll get into that and also other stuff around the NBA. All right. So I wanted to talk about, but this particular subject, and I think this is people that have been showing various opinions around, just YouTube, but also around social media, whatever. Um, KG has some interesting points that he made this week, where he talked about his generation of players that he played against back then couldn't handle today's NBA, and this is some of the things he had to say. So just listen to this. He said, end quote, I don't think guys from 20 years ago could play in this game. 20 years ago, guys could use their hands to control players. Now you can't even use your hands. That what makes defense damn near impossible. Can you imagine not hand checking Michael Jordan? Nah. The fact that you can't touch players gives the offensive players so much flexibility. Defensive players have to take angles away and stuff like that. But if you have any creativity and ambition, you could be great. You could be a great offensive player in this league. He also even mentioned about the assessment of the 3 point line and how fast paced the NBA has become. This is what he had to say about that. Steph Curry revolutionized things with being able to shoot from distance from such consistency. Klay Thompson, Damian Lillard, these guards changed the game. I don't know if even the guards from 20 or 30 years ago could play in this time right here. It's creative, it's competitive, it's saucy. You'll get dropped, and they will break your ankles and cross you over and break your ACL these days. The game is in a great place. End quote. So I had the opportunity to really think about what really he was pretty much saying. And I will say this as a guy that, grew up in the early 2000s watching NBA basketball and did watch a bit of Michael Jordan in his last championship season, there has been a lot of changes to how the game is being played. You know, we talk about this all the time, and we have debates about this long into the night about how today's players couldn't survive, the 80s and the 90s, and how today's players could say y'all couldn't handle our era, this, that, and the third. I mean, it's to me, it's more of a generational type of argument, but there are some substances to what KD is saying that I do agree with. When he basically talked about defenses, where you can't even use your hands. You can't even you hand check people anymore. He's right about that. And you have to go rewind that back towards the 93-94 season. That was when the NBA initially started making changes to taking away hand checking, making it near impossible to try to, score I should say more like nearly impossible to stop, a guy from scoring. Now, when you also translate it into the mid 2000s, when they took away hand checking entirely, that's when you saw more of the scoring, take place. Greatest example of that, D'Antoni's Phoenix Suns of the early 2000s. Okay, when Mike D'Antoni introduced that 7 seconds or less offense, that pretty much so-called revolutionized the game of basketball, and it did. I will not lie, it did. His teams were fun paced. They loved to score even though they neglect the defense all the time. When you look back at that time, Mike D'Antoni's evolution of offense really was is what really kickstarted that evolution. Okay, and Steve Nash was basically the co-captain of that great offense. Okay, now they won a lot of games. They won at least 50 to 60 games per season, but never made it to an NBA Finals. Why? Because they lacked playing defense, or they just neglected playing defense. Take it how you want it. All right. Now, when I talked about, defenses being taken away, what are the things that have been taken away that you've seen now? There's no more man to man defense. It's more about, playing more of the zone type of defenses and making guys, take, bad shots from near half court, which some of the guys can make shots from near half court. All right. The other thing too is that you've taken away the physicalness of the game, where you can't bump a guy full court. You can't challenge the guy from basically bringing the ball up the court because now you got to let the guy breathe a little bit. So the only way you can try to shut a guy down is basically using your feet. And I can tell you something right now. There are a lot of players in the NBA that had very poor feet when it comes to defenses. All right. Now look, when I hear this kind of argument about the 90s players or the 80s players, they didn't have a lot of high scoring games. No, that's not true. The different Nuggets in the early 80s, with Alex English leading them, they averaged at least about 115 points per season. They were one of the best high scoring teams in the 80s, except that they just could not be able to stop anybody, and they just were not consistent enough to put a good string of good seasons together. And don't forget this. The Fat Space Showtime Lakers were also one of the best offensive scoring teams in the NBA. In fact, their best year, in my view, was their 86-87 season. Now, when you look at the Lakers of that year, all right, when you look this up, they basically were second in the NBA in terms of scoring. They averaged about 117 points per game, and they were the best offensive efficiency in the NBA. Okay, so I really get get mind boggled when people say that the 80s didn't have a lot of high scoring games. That's not true at all. And the Bulls at that time were actually in the top 5 in terms of scoring. All right. So there are some similarities in terms of what the scoring is coming from. But what I'm talking about is in terms of the physicalness of basketball being taken away from now. Which KD is right about that. And on a side note, I think this is uh, a reply back to basically from Shaquille O'Neal and Charles Barkley that mostly despise, today's basketball and how much they, despise how the game has changed. And I agree. I do agree that the game of basketball is not as fun, it's not as pleasant to watch because you got teams that jack up threes every night. I mean, you think about this. The average attempts, during that period of time was between 14 to 18 attempts per game in a couple of decades ago. Think about this for a moment. The NBA, this is where I really researched this. The NBA teams are averaging 30 plus attempts per night, and it's growing with every season. Okay, not many teams are looking to go inside as much anymore. It's now mostly about spread the court out, penetrate and kick, and find open shooters for 3-point shots. That's what the game has pretty much evolved itself into. And the NBA has to take responsibility in the fact that they're the ones that basically restricted defenses to where you can't even get up close to a guy anymore without calling it a foul. And I can understand where a lot of the older fans are coming from. That is an unpleasant game to watch because you can't even defend a guy anymore. All right. Now I do agree that today's guards are much more creative than what they were before. But I will tell you this: to say that the guards back then couldn't compete in today's NBA, I kind of disagree with that. See, Jason Kidd wasn't the best of shooters, but he's in the top 10 in terms of 3-point percentage. Okay, and Jason Kidd was excellent in terms of basically putting together a great team together, and also in the fact that he could take a bad team and make it into a good one. Think about this for a moment. When he was traded to the New Jersey Nets in 2001, they were just thinking that they probably could win at least 42 games and just get to the playoffs and see where they go. They won 52 games and made it to the NBA Finals. All right. A team with Keith Van Horn, Kerry Kittles, Kenyon Martin, all right, Lucius Harris, a rookie Richard Jefferson, made it to the NBA Finals in his first year. You think about that. All right. Don't tell me that Jason Kidd couldn't play in today's NBA. He would thrive in terms of the open court score. In fact, Jason Kidd was one of the best, was always in the top 5 in terms of assists. Okay, there's a reason why he's in the top 5 all time in terms of career assists. Okay, Jason Kidd would thrive in today's basketball. Steve Nash, 2-time MVP. He executed the pick and pop better than any other point guard of his time. He would thrive in today's NBA. Allen Iverson, great 2-guard player. All right, the open court scoring that you see in today's NBA. Think about this for a moment. Allen Iverson won MVP in 2001. When you look at his averages, in terms of his career, the year that he won MVP, all right, in 2001, he pretty much played 71 games and averaged 31.1 points per game on basically 32% from 3-point range in terms of 44% from the field. All right. Imagine him playing in today's NBA with that kind of freedom in the backcourt. He would probably average about 36 to 38 points per game if he wanted to. All right. Same with Kobe Bryant. Same with Ray Allen. And let me tell you something. Ray Allen would have the all-time leader in 3-point makes pretty much well secured. All right. But amount of freedom that a lot of the shooters can have now. Okay, Vince Carter, Tracy McGrady, a lot of these guards could thrive in today's NBA. All right, but the point I'm trying to make to you is that I don't think that KD's take was kind of asinine. I mean, he's giving praise to today's NBA, which he should, and he's kind of pretty much countering to the argument that today's game is a little bit more different than what you see back 20 years ago. Shaquille O'Neal, great player. We know how dominant he was, but if we're being honest with ourselves, the game is so spread out now that his game, which is basically go inside of the post and then bang all over you, that wouldn't work anymore because of how the game has changed. The same would be for Charles Barkley, Moses Malone, and a lot of the other guys, and even Patrick Ewing. So he's not taking a shot at those players. I think he's what he's trying to say is that these guys in today's NBA, you got to give these guys a little bit more credit and how talented that they are, even with all the rules restrictions and all the things that they've taken away in terms of the defensive side of the ball. Now, the last great defensive team that you could look up with without even thinking about it are the 2003 2004 Detroit Pistons. All right, that team was a phenomenal defensive team. All right. Sir, they weren't the best offensive team. They only scored about 102 points per game. But in terms of their overall defensive rating, they were the second best defensive team in the NBA. And that 2004 Eastern Conference Finals against the Pacers, it was a dogfight to the finish. All right. Those were two great defensive teams, pretty much going at each other toe for toe. And a lot of the scores were pretty much in the mid 70s to early 80s in those games. I mean, it was war. All right. Especially that game two. The game two, people tend to forget. Even though it was one of the most, it was basically a set of I forgot what the score was. Let me look this up real quick. Just a little real quick. The game two of that series between those two teams, okay, it was basically 72 to 67 victory. Now, I want you guys to think about this for a moment. In terms of the amount of block shots that was taking place in that game, okay? You think about it. There were 7 block shots by the Pacers and 19 block shots by the Detroit Pistons. You add those up together, let's see. 7 plus 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26 block shots in one game. All right. That was a dogfight to the finish. It culminated when Tayshaun Prince chased down Reggie Miller for that game-saving block, which is one of the all-time greatest defensive plays in NBA history. So that's what I'm talking about. I think because of that series and because of how defense was becoming much more of a beautiful art that the NBA had to do was basically said we have to do something to try to appease more fans. So they took away the physical nature of defense, took away hand checking, and then you saw the score increase even more. And so I do admit that there are some nights where I just don't watch many of the games because the games have become much more of a snooze fest. Because unfortunately, because of how handicapped defenses are, it's pretty much taken away the value of how basketball is. In all honesty, I would prefer watching a college basketball game or even a high school game because at least you get to see real competitive basketball playing in between the lines. Not in the NBA, unfortunately. Even though I respect a lot of the athletes that pretty much work their butts off to get into that level because it's not easy at all. But the way that the NBA has taken away defenses, it's pretty much handicapped a lot of the teams that wanted to play, a defensive oriented type of basketball. And so I get where a lot of the old school fans are coming from, but I do understand where a lot of the new fans are coming from. And we need to stop having this argument about, oh, you're hating all that stuff. Bro, people have different opinions of how they watch basketball. All right. And so do I. But we just need to be appreciation about how, the game or what the game has become, but we'll also pay respects to the people that helped build the NBA and built basketball to what it is for the next generation that's going to come down the line. So that's just my 2 cents. You let me know what you think in the comment section below. And with that, I'm out. Peace.